Harry Anagnostaras-Adams is running the KEFI Gold project in Ethiopia, a fascinating country, one that's really on the up at the moment. Transited through Ethiopia last year, and I was very impressed by what I saw. But Harry's got a much greater understanding of what's going on and what the opportunities are there. So first off, Harry, we're talking about Ethiopia today. Let's hear a little bit from you about just what the country is like, where it is, how's it situated, what's the geography, what's it like to be walking around in Ethiopia?
It's really pertinent set of questions, Alistair, right now, because I suppose for two reasons. One is the delays and past frustrations we were suffering as a company, as a developer in Ethiopia, were all to do with what I'd call the setting of Ethiopia and the conditions of Ethiopia and the atmosphere within Ethiopia. Wasn't to do with the company or the project. So that's a critical important factor to understand, I think, and you're right to raise it. The other reason I think it's very timely because it's just changed so dramatically and it continues to change dramatically. And I think anyone who wants to consider allocating capital to Ethiopia or to KEFI within Ethiopia should understand what you're raising. So, compliments, if you like, for picking the right question, in my view. There's a couple of very, very broad introductory comments that perhaps set a scene, and then I'll take it a little bit deeper. You can cut me off if I ramble on too much, so to speak. Ethiopia is, an ancient, it basically represents a nation of 80 tribes, 80 languages. It's an ancient civilization that goes back millennia. The birthplace of Christianity in many respects, and indeed the birthplace of a lot of Islamic foundations in many respects. And indeed the population is, not exactly 50-50, but not far from 50-50 Christian and Islam. And there are no issues of religious tension in the country. That's a critically important factor given today's geopolitics globally. And it's a distinguishing feature compared with West Africa, where there's some systemic challenges to some West African countries from deep-seated, how would I put it, terrorist groups who tend to associate themselves with one particular religious sect. It doesn't matter which sect it is one sect, and it uses that sect as an excuse to conduct attacks on countries and their societies. There's nothing like that in Ethiopia, point one. Point two is that it's the only country in Africa that's never been colonized. The Italians got a bit close. They were there for a few years. Mussolini was enjoying the opportunity to get his hands on it. And in fact, the British put an end to that. And that's the closest it's ever come to colonization. So there's something very special in the Ethiopian character, the DNA, for that simple statement, being the only country of 54 in Africa that's never been colonized. That's a pretty notable fact. It doesn't come without something very deep in the character of the people. In modern times, what's happened is that it was an empire, the world's last empire until 1974, Emperor Haile Selassie. And then it was a communist-backed military regime, quite a brutal regime. And in the very heart of the city, in Meskel Square, there's a museum called the Red Terror Museum, so that people will never forget the terror of a brutal regime and how it inflicted pain on its own people. It's right there in the heart of the city, so no one will ever forget. I've been shown around it, and the person who showed me around it showed me the torture techniques of those days in the 1980s, 70s and 80s. And then he told me that wax figure, that victim was him. So treated very personally.
Yeah.
Then it was replaced by US-backed freedom fighters that won, if you like, at the same time as the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they were sort of led by a minority ethnic group called the Tigrayans, and that controlled the country, that regime, if you like, controlled the country till 2018. And in 2018, it moved to broad-ranging democratic reform. And there was a peaceful handover to a populist leader who represented the majority ethnic group. And incredible pride. I was there. People queued from midnight to dawn to vote. They were so thrilled and proud that they're having a vote. Incredible. The only problem was that, in hindsight, the new democratically based leadership went too fast, I'd have to say, with hindsight, and unleashed changes in society to reflect democratic reform that were just way too fast, and the country wobbled quite dramatically. And the minority ethnic group that had lost power, if you like, over the majority, tried to conduct a coup, and that was repelled. And 3 years ago, it was all over. It lasted a couple of years, turmoil, and it was finished. So what you've got is really interesting, like you can read books on it, a terrifically strong ancient civilization, never been colonized, only a few years into democracy, a wobble during the introduction of democracy, and it was quickly squashed down by the majority, imposing the right of the majority to control the country. And now it's game on, in a sense that turmoil in 2021 was so damaging to the economy that it really crippled many aspects of the economy. And it was self-inflicted, you might say, but it stopped what had been a 20-year run, almost 20-year run at being in the top 10 growth countries in the world. And then it sort of floundered for a couple of years. And now I think it's number 13 or 12 as we speak. So it's getting quickly back into the top 10 growth countries of the world, but as a democracy. And the US and the EU and the Chinese and the Russians have all aligned around this. They have no choice. Ethiopia asserted itself again. As you can see, I've sort of fallen in love with the country. I admit it. I'm biased, but one can't help but be impressed by the rigor of reform and the tenacity of really going for it when it aligns, And an example of that would be Ethiopian Airlines. When the country aligned around building an international airline, it's now the leading airline of Africa. There's a new $5 or $7 billion airport being built just outside Addis Ababa to be a major international hub. When the country goes, it goes. In terms of land acreage, it's about the size of Spain and France put together. That sort of scale. 130 million people. Second largest population in Africa after Nigeria. The hub of the base for the African Union. And I think perhaps because it's the only country that's never been colonized, Africans generally acknowledge that, and based, like Brussels is based in the EU. Brussels is the headquarters, if you like, of the EU. Addis Ababa is the headquarters of the African Union, the AU. Provides the largest number of peacekeepers from its military to the UN. Very well regimented and trained military. It's the hub of the hub of the Horn of Africa, if you like, politically, surrounded by countries that are generally much less stable, notwithstanding that 2-year crisis a couple of years ago, which has passed and will never return. So that's Harry's potted history of Ethiopia. Today, it's incredible reform. The pace of reform is amazing. And, we were trailblazers on certain reforms ourselves. We were tenacious, had to defend ourselves politically, negotiating wise, at law, and so on, to forge reforms that were absolute prerequisites for international project finance. The most conspicuous being the exemption of capital controls, exchange controls on a major mining project. And we negotiated that, and it was passed it was proclaimed into law. There were many other things we negotiated. But we were like, how would I put it, trailblazers? But now it doesn't seem like we're trailblazers in a sense. I mean, we have great relationships as a result of all of that. But the country is sort of charging ahead with all these reforms because it's essentially gone from what I'd call government to government dealings, government to government funded growth. It's largely infrastructure, Africa's largest hydro scheme, highways, whatever. It's gone from that to private sector growth. And private sector growth demands international banking convention, international finance, convention. And only 2 days ago, yesterday or the day before, I've lost track, to be honest, but there was a legislation passed in Parliament to facilitate our banking deal. So we and our banks have insisted on legislative reform to embed in legislation what is required to, how would I put it, open the doors of Ethiopia to international finance on conventional terms, with the right to clearing accounts in a major financial center like London and so on. And over the course of the last 9 or 12 months, the currency has been floated. The IMF, World Bank, has come in with a $13 billion stimulus package. The stock exchange has been formed. The first IPO has been consummated. It's quite a sort of a game on thing, and I truly think that any international investor who's into trying to pick the turn of a country would have to have Ethiopia on very high up on the list. And one of my colleagues is a ex-Macquarie Bank head of mining and metals, and his speciality has been foreign, what do you call it, frontier markets. He spent decades living in Asia in particular, and he's always recounting to me the analogies between the economic turn of Ethiopia today with what happened in 1990 or 91, I've forgotten which year he picked, for Indonesia, where, I don't know if you remember the term, the Asian tigers, when the tiger economies took off and everybody globally was talking about the tiger economies.
Yep.
That's what's happening in Ethiopia, and he's telling me what's going to happen next because he's lived through it himself, and he can see it and feel it, and it's quite something special to be a part of.
So, is there much money in Ethiopia itself? I'm thinking about the opportunities for local investment to come into local projects, and for the sort of financial benefit of the business community inside Ethiopia, and the opportunities that are available to them, in partnership with companies like yours and some of the other mining companies that have gone in there.
Yeah, well, it's close to our heart, that question, because social license at the very community-based level, all the way up to the leader of the government type level, is quite the key to success, particularly in mining, when you're managing the whole spectrum of engagement with the world, from community relations to regional development, through to fiscal impacts on the nation. Mining companies impact this full spectrum of those things, and most businesses do not. And therefore, absolutely critical to have alignment and support as much as possible. And, that's one of the reasons we picked Trilakapi. It's nowhere near a border, and borders in Africa can be quite fluid. people who've been walking backward and forwards in a certain direction, you don't tell them, no, there's a hypothetical line there. You can't cross that border anymore. So hang on a minute, we've been putting our cattle over there for the last 3,000 years, and so on. So being nowhere near a border was a comforting thing to us. But having no artisanal history provides that there's no legacy issues, social or environmental. That was a critically important thing to us. And artisanal, I mean little scale community-based mining that can, stir up the dirt and create contamination, which we don't have to contend with. So they were big ticks for us to select this project. The next two big ticks were its high grade and its high recovery. If you've got high grade and high recovery, you're 2/3 of the way there. No quality of management can change low grade and low recovery. But putting good management with high grade and high recovery, you make a lot of money in a location that has the advantages I've just mentioned. And when we arrived and we saw, we were the first movers, if you like, for an international development, and we invited the government to be our partner to cement support politically at the highest level. And that support has been split between federal, regional, and the sovereign fund. Now, the sovereign fund in Ethiopia, by virtue of the fact that it was an empire up until 1974, is the largest sovereign fund in the continent. So we have federal, regional, sovereign fund as our partners in the operating company. They've come in at an entry price. There's a 5% free carry, but the investment capital of about $20 million that they've put into the project has come in at an entry price of about $200 million. So that's already done and in process, and the money's flowing in. So complete disconnect between the money coming in and the pricing of it down in the subsidiary and the market cap of the company up the top. So that we tackled these things from day one in the ways I've been describing. But now to come specifically to your question, a couple of years ago, the head of the new Capital Markets Authority approached us and said, listen, you're used to international stock markets, we're not. We can see that you move around the world, we don't. Can you help us think through the creation of a mining sector in the about to be created Ethiopian Stock Exchange? And, to cut a long story short, we brought Nomad down from England, from London, and, had workshops and so on, and helped them get their head around the whole thing. And these reformists in the country are all London and New York trained people. They're quite familiar with the concepts themselves, and they're the reformists of the country. Just that the country's infrastructure hasn't been designed around it. It's sort of the remnants of an empire and a communist-backed regime, so to speak. So you bump into the occasional Marxists and you have these sparring matches intellectually, so to speak, still. And so we did all that. And then jumping forward to today, what does that mean for this project? It means that we've designed a particular instrument for part of the equity capital of this project. 70% of the funding is done by international development banks, so it's debt. So 30% by putting in equity capital alongside the past investment. The past investment's about $100 million, and the additional equity capital investment about $80 million. And part of that, about a quarter of that, a bit more, is coming in from local investors. And how have we done that? We've done it for alignment, as we've been discussing, to sort of stitch major private enterprise institutions and family offices together with our agenda. It's alignment in the truest sense of people having skin in the game, money on the table. And The government wants that, and we've done that. And the security we've created allows an investor of local currency, which is called the Ethiopian birr, to invest in birr, but to lock it against the US dollar. And then when they get redeemed, get their money back after 8 years, after the secured banks are all gone, they get back the birr equivalent of the same dollars, so that they're fixed, they're protected, they're hedged. So it's quite a special protective device for a country that has a weak currency. Countries at this stage of their economic overhaul tend to have pretty weak currencies until they settle down. It takes time to settle down. So that's point one. We'll list it, which allows them liquidity to get out if they need the cash. So that's supporting the agenda that we're asked to support about creating listed entities. And this is our Ethiopian holding company we're referring to. We'll list those securities. And we're also giving them a gold kicker. If gold goes up, if we receive gold proceeds at prices above gold at the point of their investment, they'll share in that upside as well for the however many ounces in effect they've bought an interest in. So as you're hearing from me, the way this has been designed has been partly to do with sort of stitching together stakeholders to make it a Ethiopian as much as possible as a venture, tying the community together with insurance companies and other institutions in the country and the government as well at the ownership level and at the financing level, and at the same time, making an offering, if you like, which is attractive to the Ethiopian investor because they don't have the opportunity to actually hedge their currency. And so this is, it's a live topic which we've been acting on. Where does this go? It's in a sense, sort of, it's up to us. The sky's the limit, really. We can expand as much as our results warrant. We can expand the offerings to local investors as much as the opportunities warrant. The country is certainly keen for us to expand and to develop the sector and to help them develop the capital markets as well, to the extent that our efforts play any role. Only next month, the Ethiopian ambassador to Britain has asked us to help arrange for what you call large city-based global investment institutions to come into the embassy to hear all this and to listen to it all. It's not just about KEFI; it's about the mining sector generally and how Ethiopia is opening up. It has quite a number of development assets in a sort of a backlog for development. It's going to grow very quickly. It's got a world-class potash belt, which will be developed, no question, very quickly for the fertilizer industry, both domestically and internationally. Gold will be developed, and a number of new projects. I've got no doubt. I'm aware of some of them. Lithium. It's got a world-class lithium belt. So it by virtue of the backlog of the sort of the stuck projects, it's going to go quickly because it's got a few to sort of develop quite quickly. As you know, in mining, it takes a long time to go from discovery through to production. And most exploration ventures don't even get to the point of discovery, let alone through to production. The flip side of the past frustrations in Ethiopia is that the backlog of projects that deserved to be developed and got stuck can now take off. And so to the extent now that Ethiopia is well motivated to introduce all these economic reforms and to stimulate minerals sector development, it means that the next few years is going to be, time to make hay, so to speak.
So you mentioned the fact that you were basically trailblazers in Ethiopia, many years ago. And you touched a moment ago on the sort of increasing activity in the mining sector. Perhaps you could just sort of flesh that out a bit. I mean, there's huge opportunity there, but some other big operations are already in development, aren't they? And the likes of Wheaton Precious Metals are investing in them. What is the activity in the mining sector like at the moment in Ethiopia, with reference to your project and to the other projects that are going on around you?
Well, first of all, if you looked at a map of gold occurrences, known gold occurrences, you see a very intense cluster of dots in the area that we're in, Western Oromia, and you see another cluster of dots in the north. And anyone who sort of knew anything about the pharaohs back in ancient Egyptian civilization perhaps heard of the Nubian Empire. And it was the Nubian Empire that this area was a part of that supplied gold. So gold has been mined in non-industrial scale, smaller scale, for thousands of years. There's 300,000 or 400,000 ounces a year today. And because of the gold price taking off, gold today is the largest export generator of the country already. Then going into the industrial scale world, the largest private sector employer in the country, a private company, no public exposure at all in the sense of ownership, is called Midrock, and that's a conglomerate of many businesses, from buses through to Pepsi Cola through to gold mines, and it has an industrial gold mine called Legadembe, which has got a new lease of life because of the gold takeoff and doing a major cutback on its open pit and going deeper underground. So Legadembe's industrial scale development that will keep going for years, I'm sure. And that's a bit south of us in the same general area. The Midrock people and we are sort of chair and deputy chair of the local mining association that we created with the ministry to begin the process of engagement between the regulators and an industry association. A group called Allied Gold, the guys who had a terrific success in their previous venture called Yamana Gold, they formed this new company, and it's called Allied Gold. And about 18 months ago, I think, it was the largest mining IPO in North America for a decade. And it raised about 250 million US, of which 2/3 was allocated for Ethiopian development to a project further west of us on the border with South Sudan. That project is called Kurmuk. Now that project is not relying on what you'd call bank financing, project financing like we are. They're relying on equity financing and Silver Wheaton coming in with their streams as well, and they've got some other assets they're able to hawk, so to speak, to develop all this. And they're in construction mode. They're running fast to get into production, and that's good for us. It means the international mining community has heard about Ethiopia taking off, which is great, and it helps us. They're able to go much quicker than us because they're not relying on what you'd call the rigor of bankability. To make something actually truly bankable as a standalone venture, you obviously have to jump some very high hurdles on all fronts. Whereas if you're funding against other projects without debt capital involved, it's a different sort of hurdle to jump. It's not a criticism, it's just a fact of financing and the rate at which one can apply capital. And particularly with us, particularly important to us because our stock has been a very low stock in a low sector, in a low stock market aim, perhaps one of the world's worst performing stock markets for a decade for mining. And we've, if you like, we've had to do all this with minimal reliance on the public market. Now we've had to rely on the public market, in many respects, but the whole funding for this project effectively has been put together down in the subsidiary with banking and local investors and the mining contractors putting in capital, and we've done all that by using our efforts and our skills down at the project level because the stock market wasn't supportive of us. Now that's, I think, about to change because all the things you probably know more about than I do, but capital allocation to this sector is changing before our very eyes. And I have spoken with more first tier global investment institutions in the last 2 weeks. Well, it's not hard to say this. I'm going to say more in the last 2 weeks than I had in 10 years, but I hadn't spoken to any in 10 years. So, but I've spoken to a handful in the last 2 weeks. They're engaging. The file has been opened on the junior mining space and looking for the next growth story. And the fact that my team, the team that we came from Australia with, set up Atalaya in a new jurisdiction in Spain and put in Spanish management, and it ran with it, and it's been a successful operation. And we're very proud of it. The fact that we've made discoveries in Saudi Arabia, whilst the rest of the world's still talking about how to get into Saudi Arabia, we've made discoveries in Saudi Arabia. Whilst the rest of the world is analysing Ethiopia, saying, is this the time to get in? I wonder how it's going on there. We've actually got a project ready to start now. So we've demonstrated that we've got the foresight and the courage to go in, and hopefully now we have the capital markets recognition going forward for that. So I think Ethiopia is going to be a big help to us. It's been a big anchor around my ankle for nearly a decade, holding us back. But the last couple of years, and particularly now, I think it's palpable, the energy and the conviction to jump forward and develop the private sector and mining as the highest priority. So I think right now it's become an incredible, how to put it, supporter and stimulant. And I suppose my final comment is that just over the course of the last month, Harry the barking dog at the banks and at government people to get things to happen has been replaced by all of those guys barking at me every day and the team every day. The energy and the impetus is now spread through the syndicate, and everybody wants us to go faster, which is wonderful. I mean, I don't think I've experienced banks pressuring me to close and get on with it before, and that's a function of the fact that we're pretty well ready, and it takes a dozen parties, a dozen sets of lawyers, all these things, getting the parliamentary ratification only yesterday or the day before, whenever it was. These things all have to be done, but right now the energy of getting going is all pressuring us rather than us pressuring other people, sort of thing, which is partly because of our alignment with local people. We're the only people who have the government as our partner. We're the only people who've created instruments for local institutional investors and high net worth officers to get involved with us, an international company. We've done this very deliberately, and hopefully now we'll see the fruit of all that.
Do you think more junior miners will now go into Ethiopia, perhaps either following in the wake of your success, or else just seeing the opportunities that you described a moment ago in lithium and potash and gold? Do you think the country is now really sort of ripe for a bit of an influx of more companies?
Yes, I think with all respect to the regulatory authority in the mining space, I think they themselves would admit that they haven't done a particularly good job historically. And I've known 9 mines ministers in 10 years in the country, which I suppose reflects the fact that they themselves would acknowledge that it hasn't been a particularly good job. Somebody will probably smack me after this call gets published for talking like that, but I think that that's the truth. Now, having said that, the desire to roll out the red carpet is there. The very fact that we could not be pressured into starting until all the I's had been dotted demonstrates the respect for doing it properly. The very fact that our company jointly runs the mining association with the local conglomerate, the very fact that I've personally been asked to arrange investment forums, internationally for the Ethiopian mining space in particular, tells you that we've developed over, by sparring and boxing with each other over these years, we've developed quite a healthy relationship. Now, today, there are some very decent explorers in the country. The Sun Peak people from Canada. It's the old Nevsun team that discovered Bisha in Eritrea, and they're following the same VMS trend down into Ethiopia. Very, very good team, and they're active. So they're ahead of the gang, if you like. The Newmont people are up north in the same belt, the VMS belt. They've had some joy up there, but they haven't redeployed yet. They're watching, waiting, as a conservative giant multinational tends to do. Over in Saudi, the Saudis are very keen to have multi-billion-dollar companies get in. I would counsel any regulatory authority not to just focus on the majors, because the juniors are the ones that make the discoveries. You've got to foster a lot of juniors into the space, serious juniors, not asset flippers, but serious juniors. And I think that hasn't started yet. It hasn't started. I think there's a desire to make it start and a recognition that you need juniors, but it hasn't started yet. And I think it's got a way to go. But it comes down to really the degree of effort that one's prepared to put in. I can be criticized for having stuck at it in a country that wasn't ready. I was ahead of the time, so to speak. One could criticize KEFI for having done that. Or one could say they were visionaries and got in ahead of everybody else. Depends on your particular point of view. And I think juniors coming into the space needs a fair bit of work now. It needs proper geological mapping. Only 25% of the country's been mapped. I mean, it's ridiculous in terms of geology. We're in the field. We're pegging and doing things in the field. We're spreading our wings before the gang turns up, you might say. But the gang will turn up, but it's not quite a smooth machine. It needs more regulatory overhaul and more public information so people can land and get on with it instead of wasting years trying to get their hands on information. It's a long process, this exploration gig, and I think Ethiopia has a way to go before it's easy to jump in. But it's certainly ripe for that to happen. And if you're prepared to put in some hard work to be part of the birth of a sector in a modern sense, then I think it's the perfect time.
Is there much Chinese presence in the country?
Yes, I remember. It was fascinating. During that civil war, as it was called, it was really only a war with a faction in the north of the country. But during that time, because of all the elevated risk and negative publicity, the hotel compound that I stay in, the breakfast room basically emptied, and there were only two people in that breakfast room for some months during the peak of that sort of crisis. It was me and a commando. And, the only two people only two guests in the room. And then when that passed, when that little chapter passed and the world recognized that, hey, there's nothing going on in Addis Ababa and the problem's up north, it's nowhere else. But when that led to people turning up again, the breakfast room filled with people from China, whilst the Western guys were consulting, McKinsey's and reading The Economist and having strategic planning sessions. The Chinese sent by people in here to get deals done, and so they were quick off the mark. So due credit, I suppose, to them for being entrepreneurial. But on the other hand, if you asked me to name one discovery made by any Chinese company ever in my lifetime, I couldn't name one. So it's not exactly a country with a great track record of exploration success. And so the answer to getting the exploration sector going does not lie, in my opinion, with attracting explorers from China who've never found anything. It lies in attracting people who've made discoveries like KEFI or like Sunpeak, or people who've actually got a record of discovery. 99 out of 100 geologists never discover anything. It's just a fact of life. And so it's a really curly question. It's a fundamentally important question. If one wants to develop a sector in a country, it has to be got right, and it needs more work to get it right.
Tell us something about the power situation there. Can you get power? Is there a grid, or are there power cuts, or is it all smooth and fine and dandy, or variable by region? What is the situation as regards power?
Well, the country's just completed building the largest hydro scheme in Africa. It's called the Great Renaissance Dam. You can see what the country thinks about is happening here. It's a renaissance of the country. And the headwaters of the Nile are here. The Blue Nile starts, and it's 90% of the water of the Nile starts in the Blue Nile, which starts in Ethiopia. So the headwaters of the Nile have been dammed and are already producing electricity. And you can buy electricity for 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour in Ethiopia, which is a fraction of what it might cost you running diesel plants in the middle of Australia. And what you have to pay for is connecting to the grid, and that's part of our plan. That's part of our program. And also, whilst we're out near the generation of the power, we're not down the tail end of the power reticulation, but near the head of the power reticulation. The risk of brownouts and blackouts for us is extremely low, but notwithstanding that, the cost of downtime is so high for us. The intensity of capital deployment into a mine and the high margin of that production provides you every day means that you should keep the thing running 24/7, and therefore, as insurance, we've designed into the system a diesel plant purely as a backup. It's just insurance. So we'll have a diesel plant on site, sitting there, and turn it on for a week, a year, or whatever, just to make sure it's working or whatever. But generally speaking, power is very low cost and very reliable. And because of the high profitability of the Tulu Kapi mine, we've built in redundancy, so to speak, on that side as well. We've built in redundancy on water supply also. There should be enough water, barring a 1 in 100 year event. It should be enough water from reticulation and recirculation on the site. But we've designed in a pipeline down to the major river, which is just close by as a standby. So we've built in redundancies. This is part of the risk mitigation of the whole project as a first mover at bankable standards. There's other things we've done like that, but power is it's a real competitive advantage of the country, and it's one of the features, if you like, that they're using to promote manufacturing in the country and other things to take advantage of the low cost power.
Are there any seasonal factors involved in mining?
Out where we are, we're probably most international people think that what I thought before I came to Ethiopia, that the country is barren and arid and so on, and drought prone. There's a part of the country that is, but the vast majority of the country is not. Addis Ababa is up at 2,200 meters above sea level, and the arid parts of the country can be below sea level. In fact, the lowest land on Earth, on the planet, below sea level is in the the east of Ethiopia, and but most of the country is up high, and Tula is up at 1,700 meters altitude, and that has the soil there is fantastic, chocolate brown, fertile soil. There's a wet season, June through September, more or less. It's not like the Australian wet season. It's not tropical because of the altitude there, and the climate's a bit more temperate. But it does rain every night. But it drains quickly. The topography is rolling hills, and so it just drains away quite quickly and runs off. So it's not a major wet season problem, if I can put it that way. Like in Australia, you get pits flooding, and it disturbs operations. You have to build stockpiles and so on to work through it. It's not like that, but it's something you build into your planning, that there's a 3 or 4 months of higher rainfall than usual that you have to work your way around. So that's taken into account when we start our construction. It'll be during this wet season that's coming up. The plan is that we'll be focused on moving the community and procuring international fabrication of the plant and triggering it. And then as soon as the wet season has finished, the first phase of resettlement will be finished, and we'll mobilize into earth moving for the civil works to prepare the plant area, pouring foundations and so on at the beginning of the imminent dry season, if you like. So whilst it's not a major problem, we do build it into the planning to just make life as easy and efficient as possible.
So finally, Harry, where do you see Ethiopia going? I mean, it seems to be on the up. There's lots of positive developments and good news stories to talk about. Where do you see the country in 5 years, and what do you think success will look like for Ethiopia?
I have no doubt that the stimulus to private sector development is working. July last year, all the multinationals, without exception to the ones I know, Coca-Cola, Dangote, Inchcape, the vehicle importer, number of Heineken, Unilever. All these guys were like a chorus wanting to get their money out until July 2024. They couldn't get their money out. They were complaining about it. They wanted to repatriate dividends. Bang, 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 continual drum beating. And then the government floated the currency, arranged for repatriation. And within a month, they were all investing in Ethiopia, right? That spun 180 degrees, because these guys are used to dealing in lots of countries around the world, many countries in Africa, and they know that what happened here was really serious. The country had spun on its heels to go for private sector development. And when you've got 120 million people, 130 million people, I'm not sure what it is, it's a huge market. And the manufacturing sector is sort of tiny today, and it's going to grow enormously. And import replacement, pharmaceuticals, agriculture, everything, it's going to grow enormously. So, it hasn't even started yet. So I have no doubt it's going to boom here. It's booming already. We're at the early stages of it, and it's a bit awkward and, difficult to sort of traverse, but it's happening. The mining sector, because there's a backlog of projects, we'll be producing best part of 200,000 ounces a year. The Allied Gold people probably producing the best part of 300,000 ounces a year. The Midrock people, at least 100,000 ounces a year. They've got 2 projects up their sleeve to bring to the table to develop as well, those guys. There's a number of others that should be in production, perhaps one of these VMS projects up north. Because of the backlog, there's going to be, I think, instead of 1 producer today of scale, there's going to be, I'd say, 5. And instead of 300,000 or 400,000 ounces of production today, it's going to be 1.5 million ounces of production by then. So mining is going to surpass any other sector like that. It's going to be a mini version of what's happened in Western Australia. And today, mining is $2 billion of exports a year or something like that. The same geology in Western Australia, if you adjust it for land mass and you halve the prospectivity, you say, let's just make it up. I mean, it's only going to be half as prospective, even though it's the same geology. That 2 billion should be 40 billion. So, but the work has to be done. It has to be mapping, has to be proper regulation. It has to be done properly. Otherwise, explorers won't turn up and discoveries won't be made. But the next 5 years doesn't actually rely on discovery. It's just a matter of getting the show on the road on the backlog of projects. The potash deals, really, there's no reason potash can't be developed today. The resources have been discovered. It's world class. Just that the country needs to get it going. And so potash will come on stream. I've got no doubt there'll be 1 or 2 potash developments within the next year or 2. So I think it's game on. And I say to people, for KEFI, it's been defense, so to speak, to use the basketball vernacular. It's been defense until just recently. And now at last it's offense, because the country's sort of sweeping us up as well as us, I think, doing our bit to lead. We're actually now being swept along, which is great. It's a welcome change.
Well, we look forward to seeing all the developments there. It's been fascinating to talk to you about Ethiopia today, Harry. Thanks very much for taking the time.
You're welcome. Thank you.